Let us continue. First of all, thank you for staying with us, for coming back after your lunch to this session. I promise you will not be disappointed because we have another group of extremely interesting speakers. And this session will begin with Isaac Cuevas. Before introducing him, however, I should say a few words about how he came here as a speaker. This conference features a special cooperation between the Huffington Ecumenical Institute and the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Of course, we always enjoy such cooperation through our dear friend, Father Alexei Smith, who is the Director of the Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs of the Archdiocese. At the same time, last April, when we had with us at LMU the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, Olaf Fuchs-Tveit, we visited with him through Father Alexei, the Archbishop Jose Gomez. And in our conversation, I mentioned to the Archbishop that this year we are going to have a conference on immigration. And he reacted immediately. He immediately jumped on it and suggested that the Archdiocese should be a part of this conference. And so it happened, and now we have Isaac with us, representing the Archdiocese and the Office on Immigration. Isaac is the Director of the Office of Immigration Affairs. As I said, in this capacity, he is responsible for carrying out the Archbishop's vision regarding immigration. Among other things, the office provides a variety of resources on the topic of immigration and faithful citizenship. It helps the Catholic community understand the journey of immigrants and provides a pastoral understanding of immigration. It also advocates for immigration reform among the legislators. Isaac has developed a network of community leaders that implements workshops, develops programs and provides resources for the largest immigrant community in this country. And indeed, the LA Archdiocese is the largest in the United States, and it has the largest immigrant community in this nation. In addition to community outreach, Isaac works as an immigration advocate, serving as the voice for the LA Archdiocese among policy leaders and civil rights groups. Isaac knows about the immigration situation from the first hands because he himself can be regarded belonging to the mentioned 1.5 generation. He arrived in Los Angeles as a two-year-old, hand-holding child alongside his mother, Tina. They entered the United States on a tourist visa and overstayed, living in the country as undocumented immigrants for several years. During the Reagan administration, Isaac Cuevas and his mother were among the 3 million people who qualified and applied for the legislation program, providing them with a path to citizenship. You see, almost every speaker has immigration as a part of their own personal story. And Isaac is a very telling example of this big story that all immigrants share. And Isaac himself has many stories to tell, so let us listen to some of them. Please welcome.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's really an honor being among so many incredible minds that are talking about immigration. And before I tell you a little bit about what I do, let me share a quick story. Very recently, I walked into I found this neighborhood barber shop that I've never been to because my barber was on vacation. And when I sit down in the chair, I happen to sit in the owner's chair, and he was the one cutting my hair. Great little barber shop in my neighborhood. And the barber shop had a lot of old vintage items in the barber shop, right? This cash register that was like 80 years old, and he's Casey is the owner's name. He's telling me all about this vintage cash register. And he's got this amazing American flag up on the wall. Things like 50 years old, you can see it's weathered, and there's great wood all over this barbershop. And there's a mosaic picture of the San Gabriel Valley from the 1920s. And as we're talking, and as he's buzzing the side of my hair, bzzz, I said, Casey, this place is great. Great music, great atmosphere. I really feel very welcome here. And he goes, well, thank you. That's kind of what we strive for. Hopefully you'll come back. And I said, yeah, I really, really, really enjoy it here. He goes, well, yeah, we try to keep it friendly, and really we have only two rules. One, we don't talk politics, and two, we don't talk religion. And then Casey says, what do you do? And as he's buzzing my hair, I said, well, as a matter of fact, I work for the Catholic Church. And he goes, oh, are you a priest? And I said, no, I work in immigration affairs. And he stops the clippers, right? So then I found a really nice hat shop in my neighborhood that I had never been to. No, I'm kidding about the hat shop, but the story about the barbershop is actually true. And actually, Casey was nice enough to kind of break his rules for me, and we started talking a little bit about immigration. And I shared the story that Father Cyril just shared with you about how I came to this country. And he asked me how I got into this field working for the church on immigration. And it's funny because in my field, typically, historically, somebody who does what I do either comes from a community organizing background or from a legal background. And I don't come from either one of those two worlds. I actually come from a marketing background. I was a studio executive for Warner Brothers, helping them develop what's called targeted marketing. This is marketing tactics that go after Hispanics, African Americans, Asian Americans, 50 plus, gay and lesbian, you name it. Everybody except white males, I was responsible for selling them films. And that's actually how I was able to connect with the Archdiocese and meet people over at the diocese by specializing in faith films. Because while the studio saw the importance of doing multicultural marketing, I understood what our speakers before have been telling us all about, the importance of culture and tapping into culture and the nuance of culture to resonate and to connect and to then market our films. Now that's going to be a little relevant in a bit as I tell you a little bit about what I do. But as mentioned in my introduction, really my office is responsible for three things. One, we provide resources to the immigrant community here in Los Angeles. And keep in mind, the Archdiocese, again, is the largest diocese in the country with over 5 million registered Catholics. By the way, I say registered because we don't know how many aren't registered, and we don't necessarily check cards as you're coming into Mass. But regardless of our Catholic community, we offer these services and this help to anyone. And regardless of their immigrant status, I really want to emphasize that because, as you've heard, unfortunately, we're living in a time where immigration really has been politicized, and for us at the Catholic Church, we see it as a topic first and foremost of human dignity. The second component is the advocacy component, and Archbishop Gomez can't be everywhere, so it's my responsibility again to carry out his vision on comprehensive immigration reform and to speak to legislators from all over our country on the importance of pushing for change in our laws, right? And then third, and that's part of what I'm doing here today, it's the educational component of speaking to people about the importance of immigration. Now, that comes in two spaces, really. It's one, explaining to people who empathize or who understand or sometimes are immigrants on the importance of acculturating and assimilating to this new norm in a country that they're now being exposed to. It's understanding the laws, understanding that things are different here. And it's also making sure that we are supportive of their cultural identity and not letting them lose that cultural identity. They don't necessarily have to. But being in a new country, your children and future generations are going to adapt to what this country is, and they'll appreciate that culture from before, but they will also have their own identity. And again, me and my 1.5 generation way of being understands that very well. And the other part of the educational component is explaining to people who don't empathize with the immigrant journey. on how we, the church, take this topic on. And I have to say, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. Many times people who don't have that kind of empathy for immigrants harness and focus their energy on the wrong things. I was recently at a listening session at one of our parishes in San Pedro, very affluent neighborhood, really nice homes in the area, not too far from here. And the presenter talked about, are we as people of faith doing everything we can for immigrants? Putting aside the laws and putting aside the politics, as people of faith, are we actually doing everything we possibly can to help people in need, thus immigrants? And that opened up a great conversation of what we could be doing better and how things could improve. But at some point, also, there was a woman who raised her hand and said, yes, but I want to be super clear here, people are breaking the law. Now, the presenter brought her back and said, yes, we understand that there's laws and civics here that come into play, but remember, we were asking if, this is a situation or a context that we can talk about where we put the laws and we put those things aside, and she kept bringing it back to this point. Well, at some point I raised my hand and I explained that, validated her concern, right? I think it is important to understand that, yes, if people are breaking the law, and I understand where she's coming from and her concern. However, oddly enough, our legislators here in this country, both Republican as well as Democrat, the one thing they do agree on this topic is that the laws are broken, right? And as I was explaining this to her, I said, I understand your concern over defending these laws, but it would be great to know if people could channel that kind of energy towards the people and actually channel it towards our legislators to help push for change and for reform. Because ultimately, they're the ones that are responsible for changing these laws, and if they're not doing more, we have to hold them accountable. And there was all of a sudden this kind of aha moment in the room. And it's always difficult finding that compassion when you're talking to somebody in that kind of context, because what they believe is truly not necessarily what they may feel in their heart. And one of the first things I learned in doing this job is that there was this conversation that was happening with, on one side, people who felt that we should build a wall and that no one should be allowed into this country at all, and we have to implement all kinds of policies and procedures to make sure everything is uber protected. And then on the other side, you have a different set of people who think that ICE should not exist. And I can tell you firsthand that I don't believe in either one of those two extremes. And if I was to get involved in that ping pong conversation of extremism, I would lose every single time. But then what I noticed is that there's this other opportunity. And this is more of an opportunity of empathy. When the family separation issue happened about 1.5 years ago in June, and people started hearing on the news the cries of children that were being held at the border away from their parents, and then people being kept in Mexico as part of the Remain in Mexico policy. Most recently, the father and his daughter, who were photographed face down in the river at the border. Every single time one of those situations happened, the phone would go off the hook at my office, and people would start asking what they can do to help and how they can get involved. And I realized that these were moments of empathy, where all of a sudden it wasn't this ping-pong conversation of anti and for and against and negativity, but it was actually people who didn't know anything about immigration who wanted to know more about immigration. And I realized that I had the opportunity to bring people who knew nothing about immigration and start slowly bringing them over into that empathy part of understanding more about immigration and what that truly means. So it's been amazing because I've been able to have a few successes in my office. There was a young girl who came to this country from Mexico. She was in a detention center for over 18 days. She was deported back to Mexico. She calls this a freezer. These are big concrete rooms that immigrants and detainees are held in. Keep in mind she's a minor. And they're held in there to with no blankets, no cot, nothing to sleep on, while they investigate who these people are and how they are eligible to come into the country or not. Ultimately, she was deported, sent back into Mexico, and lived in their version of like a foster home for those 16 weeks. And during that process, there was kids in there, all kinds of ages. At the time, she was 12. She told me some pretty graphic stories that I won't repeat here, but I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I can't imagine having my child in a place like that, having to deal with that kind of situation. Yet, she knew that this was her best opportunity for a better life and for coming into the U.S. Eventually, she was able to get back to the border, declared her status for asylum, and was admitted in. As a result of Bishop Dave O'Connell's Catholic education grant, we were able to provide her with a free education into one of our Catholic schools. And it's amazing to me to share that she is now graduated from high school, in less than 2 years, learned English proficiently, and was able to move on and is now working with Catholic Charities at one of our centers in East LA College. Catholic Charities, and now she's helping to serve those immigrants that she once was. And just like I have success stories, there's also unfortunate failures. There was a young girl by the name of Dinta, who's from Sri Lanka. Parents are from Sri Lanka. Her dad was a very successful businessman in Sri Lanka and had his work visa to come into the U.S. At some point decided that they wanted to come all to the U.S., and he overstayed his visa. And he thought it would be really easy to get married with somebody here and adjust his status that way, divorce that person, and then come back to marry his wife. Well, it's not that easy. He was caught, and the situation was very, very, very complicated. And after working with them for almost a year on trying to find a solution and get some kind of pardon for his situation, they decided to go back to Sri Lanka. The irony is that Dinta was such a great student that she actually got a letter of recognition from the president for her studies. This is a high school girl who had only been here 5 years and excelled at her studies, so much so that the White House recognized her for her work. Now, again, I don't want to get into the legalities and what's right and what's wrong, but what I've noticed in doing this work is that as the church, it's our responsibility, it's our focus to also emphasize the mercy that needs to happen in our system, right? Obviously, when laws are broken, there's justice that needs to happen, and if there's no mercy balancing that justice out, is it truly justice? That's one of the things I struggle with the most, and it's part of the reason why I much rather get into the contextual part of what are we doing to help? What are we truly doing to help? And we can get into the semantics, and I do it all the time with people, and I don't necessarily like to try to change people's minds, again, because I feel that if I'm trying to change someone's mind, it's like trying to get them to admit that they're wrong. And that's not going to happen. But again, what I can do is I can put some focus and some effort on trying to change hearts. I'll give you one more example that fits into this student context. I was taking 2 DACA recipients, actually, up to St. John's Seminary in Camarillo on a rainy Friday afternoon. The DACA students were going to talk to all the seminarians and explain what DACA is. And on the way up there, we were sharing stories of how they came to this country, how I came to this country. I was explaining to them that I was DACA before DACA was DACA, right? That's how old I am. And these I say kids, they were in their mid-20s, dynamic, energetic, very much part of this movement to gain awareness around DACA. And I have to say I was intoxicated by their energy. It was amazing. But at some point, as we're driving up to Camarillo, which is about a almost 2-hour drive with LA traffic and rain, there was a girl, I don't recall her name, Paula, who was telling me all about escalating tactics around their movement. And I said, well, what does that mean, escalating tactics? She goes, you know, we have to make sure that DACA remains in the news and that we do things to keep this awareness on the topic. I go, okay, I follow you. What exactly are these tactics? What are you talking about specifically? She goes, you know, blocking the entrance to Disneyland on a Saturday morning, or you know, going out to block freeway traffic, and I'd be like, whoa, hold on, time out. Hey, let's. And she says, what? And I go, I disagree. And she looks at me surprised and stunned and says, what do you mean you disagree? I said, I vehemently disagree. She goes, but you work for the church and you're, you know, all about the movement and all about. I said, no, I agree that you need to have a certain amount of focus and attention around this topic. But what you don't understand and what you don't realize is that your tactics can also be taken as divisive. She didn't understand. And I speak in a lot of context, by the way. So I hope this makes sense. I said to Paul, I said, well, and I had already explained my movie background to her, right? And I said, so in movies, how do you gauge success? And Carlos, who happened to be in the back seat and is a film major, said box office. Absolutely right. Perfect. I said, great. Well, let's think of your movement. Let's think of your effort as a film, right? What you're doing when you go out there and you're blocking the entrance to Disneyland or interrupting the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which, by the way, is the most American thing you can do on Thanksgiving other than buy a 52-inch TV for $300. When you're being disruptive in this manner, you're speaking to an audience that's this big, your audience. And what you don't understand and what you don't realize is that in order for DACA to succeed, you need Avengers-type awareness and support from all over the country. And all of a sudden, again, there was this aha moment, right? And remember what I was talking about with the lady who was talking about they're breaking laws. Well, it was almost that same kind of look and that same kind of sentiment that came from Paula, where it was all of a sudden, I wasn't trying to change her mind on what her tactics were, but I was trying to get her to understand and to empathize with all of those people who maybe didn't understand what DACA is. And that when they think of DACA students, they shouldn't think of DACA students or DACA recipients as this negative thing who are out there trying to cause trouble. And it was a very eye-opening moment for her and for Carlos. And when we went in and spoke to the seminarians, they hit it out of the park, and they really contextualized what it means to be in their shoes and how they were looking to get support from everyone across the country, not just their base. The third and final case that I want to share with you guys is about a refugee student that came from Aleppo. And I was working very closely with the Knights of Columbus on this case, just as I was coming into the Archdiocese. And we actually put together a video for you, so I'm going to share that video now, that it's going to kind of give the full perspective of what that story is. And then I'll give you an update on the case.
My name is Isaac Cuevas, and recently I get an email from the church about this specific case of a girl asking for help. Here's somebody who was fearing for their life just because of their religion. They were being persecuted. Once I heard Vanna's story, it really moved me to do something about it. And so I brought it to my guys at the Knights of Columbus. And what we decided to do was help her out by putting together a GoFundMe page and helping to spread her story and explain what was going on.
My name is Vana. I was born and raised in Aleppo, Syria. In 2007, I finished my high school's final exam, getting the highest grade in my school, which allowed me to get accepted to pharmacy program in University of Aleppo. In the 5th year, the war started in Syria. It was a danger to go to school, but despite the danger, every day, I didn't give up. So watching TV news and seeing all this bombing, which makes people's body fly all over, and arms somewhere, legs somewhere, and thinking that that might be you too, and living that fear, it leaves an impact on you. Although all the nation was in danger, but we as Christians, we were one of the main targets. That's why we knew it's not safe to stay there. My dad didn't want to risk it because of the story that we heard, whether it's kidnapping, stealing, raping. So my dad didn't want to risk it. So what happened next, one day on a Monday noon, I still remember as if it was yesterday. My dad comes home and says, I found 3 tickets tomorrow to fly you out and save your life. I believe that it's because of our faith today we are where we are. During these last years, the power of God, we were able to feel it, and miracles happened. My faith was so important during these last years, which made me keep moving on in this life. Believing in God and praying for it kept me going forward and not give up. For the last few years, I've been working to support my family, myself, and saving money for school. So I got the saving for rooming and board. I got some scholarships that I applied to, and now I need help with the tuition. And this is my last opportunity to attend pharmacy school since starting next year. All the courses taken in Syria and pharmacy school will be not considered due to 10 years gap.
Raising a large amount of money like this is difficult for one person, but if we can divide it up between a lot of people, then it makes it much easier. Plus, it's worthwhile considering it's somebody who only wants to help their family, help out their community, and practice their religion.
I feel like I'm someone drowning in a big ocean. I see the beach there, but I can't reach it because I'm stuck because of my immigration status. So I need that lifesaver to take me to that beach so I can get a decent life and go to school, work without being worried about work authorization, and like any American, to live the American dream.
Now, don't try to donate because this was 3 years ago. And unfortunately, we did not meet our goal. And again, just to recap, Vanya could not continue her studies without this large amount of money, mainly because of her immigrant status. Because of her immigrant status, she would have to pay out-of-state fees, international fees, as a matter of fact, for this education that she was a semester away from completing. I mean, she was at the finish line with her education, and that all went away, unfortunately, because we weren't able to raise the money. We did raise almost $4,000 in the process, and to her credit, she asked that all that money be returned to everybody because she felt that it wasn't fair or just that that money be used for anything else. And again, it kind of just goes to show the place where she is and the kind of person that she is. And I wish that there would have been a better outcome at the time, But we actually have an update. When I called and asked her if I could share this video with you guys, she actually took the time off of work and school to come here and to talk to you firsthand and to let you know what happened with her case. So if you could please put your hands together for Vana, special surprise.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today, and I want to say thank you to the church for trying to help me. This was 2 years ago when I knocked the door of the Catholic Church seeking help, and Mr. Isaac Cuevas immediately and generously accepted to help me by raising this GoFundMe campaign. As mentioned, we didn't make the goal, but God had different plans. So even though my asylum case was pending and I had to give up on my dream of becoming a pharmacist, I was able to find different opportunity through scholarships and tuition assistance through my employer. And I attended Cal State University and earned bachelor's degree in health administration. And I graduated this May. And now I'm working on my master's degree in healthcare management. So, yes, I was lucky enough for my asylum case to be approved after 4 years of waiting, but it wasn't the same case with my sister who applied with me at the same time, but until today, her case is still pending. So today I want to raise awareness for all the people out there and refugees like me, and that are being affected by the laws and government regulations that preventing them from pursuing as such important thing as education. And it's very important for refugees to know those resources available there. And also, I think with church's solidarity and the help that can be provided to all these refugees, a change can be made. Education can become a reachable dream for refugees. Thanks so much for your time.
Question? She has a green card then? She does have her status in order, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Again, however, though, I do want to emphasize and echo the fact that this just goes to show how complicated our immigration system is, right? By the way, two most complicated forms of law in this country are what? Anybody know?
Divorce.
I don't know your wife, Tom, but immigration is one of them. The other? Income tax law. That's right. Somebody mentioned it. Income tax law. Now, keep in mind, right? Again, I speak in context a lot. Keep in mind that when you go to do your taxes, there's typically 4 different levels of legal professionals that you can go to for your taxes. You can go to a general tax preparer, a CTEC, which is an upgraded version of that, a CPA, if you so have that many assets, and then finally the premium version is a lawyer. How many are there on the immigration front? Anybody know? Nope, not 62. No, that's a horrible guess, by the way. One, just one, an immigration lawyer. That's it. Now keep in mind, somebody who's coming into this country for the first time and is coming with literally the clothing on their back, and yet the only help they can seek is somebody who is at that level. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm not saying that it's fair or unfair. I'm just pointing out, again, the contextual part of what it means to navigate this complicated system. And again, Vana's and her sister's cases, both coming in at the same time, both having the exact same story, yet her sister hasn't been able to adjust her claim yet. All the more reason why we need to put attention and focus on our legislators and help change what this system is. That's my time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac, and thank you, Vana, for sharing your stories with us. I hope you will be able to answer the questions from the floor in the end. And we continue with our next speaker, who is Bishop Maxim. Vasiljević. He was born in what is now Serbian enclave Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He graduated from the theological faculty at the University of Belgrade and then completed his MTH at the University of Athens. In 1999, at the same university, he defended his doctoral thesis in the field of dogmatics and patristics. Actually, I figured out that we studied with Bishop Maxim in the same period of time in Athens. We were together. But then I was an undergraduate student, he was a postgraduate student. In 2003 and 4, he went to France for postdoctoral studies at the University of Sorbonne in Paris in the field of Byzantine history and theology. During this time, he also studied iconography at the French Academy of Fine Arts in Paris. He was elected first vicar bishop at the Diocese of Dobro Bosna in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in 2006 he, by the decision of the Synod, he moved to the US as the bishop of the Diocese of Western America of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Bishop Maxim is one of the brightest and I would say the boldest theologians of the Serbian Church, I mean it. Well, may I share some of the recent developments, Vladika, with the audience? Really? Well, he stood for some very kind of bold truths at the faculty department of theology at the University of Belgrade, where he taught until recently, and for standing for the truth, theological truth, he was sanctioned somehow, and still he is very brave and in supporting his points, and that's why it's a rare thing among the bishops to really stand firmly for theological truths and beliefs, and to be a brave theologian and a great hierarch of the church. One of the most promising and admirable in the Serbian church. In the early 1990s, and this is another probably explains the braveness of Bishop Maxim. In the early 1990s, he was a witness of the war in his homeland in Bosnia, which cost a lot of refugees to all parts of the world, including this country. It was a huge war. It was a huge tragedy that claimed thousands lives, well, hundreds of thousands lives, some people say. Just less than a month ago, I was myself in Republika Srpska, and I saw with my own eyes barbed wires on the narrow strip of land between Croatia and Bosnia. And as we were progressing, as we were driving on our car through a by road from the city Trebinje in Republika Srpska to the Croatian coast, we saw those barbed wires, and there were minefields behind them, and we were told it's better not to step to those territories because you can fly to the sky. Many refugees from the Yugoslavian wars in the 1990s are now parishioners in Bishop Maxim's diocese, and I'm sure that he knows a lot about them and from them. We ask the bishop to share his experience and knowledge with us. Your Eminence, please welcome.
Thank you very much. We had poetry, we had theology, and I will try to mention how this whole issue with refugees and immigration was depicted and presented in art. So there are a few of those images, and I'll tell what this is about. Also, there is a book about the Serbian immigration in the United States, a monograph that was recently published, and I was the editor. So this will be my gift for the library and the school. Eminences and distinguished professors, students, and esteemed ladies and gentlemen. It is my really great pleasure and privilege to be invited to address this conference. And it's an important opportunity to share some thoughts on the topic of the immigration and healing within the ecumenical dialogue. I would like to ask you to forgive me for not being as practical as previous speakers. And one of the reasons is that I think that theology helps us and illuminates praxis epivasis theorias, okay? Without the theoretical perspective, we cannot understand our practice. The problem of refugees unites again the West, East, the East and the Orient, but this time in a very dramatic way. The dramatic crisis concerning human identity itself, the problem concerning humanity's relation to its natural environment, and perhaps the most serious crisis of all, concerning humanity's relation to its refugee crisis. All of these call for an urgent and deep reflection on the question of our responsibility in the world today. Christians are now called to unite not simply between themselves, but vis-à-vis this contemporary problem. Immigration becomes thus the important focus of ecumenism in our time. Sadly, in most of the cases, the immigrants are treated and viewed as the excessive people, the unnecessary, since there is no place for them. And starting with the news about the refugees, whom we consider to be excesses, a painter, Stamatis Skleris, began a dark canvas painting depicting the migrants, and as a repentance, his own repentance for the neglect of their breaking stories. This image of excessive people will become even darker over the years to come. On the boat full of migrants in the middle of the sea, Christ is also depicted with them because he participates in their martyrdom through his martyric death on the cross. Those who are drawn are painted with bright faces, floating in the sea and calmly expressing themselves as those who have overcome fear and terror. At a conference in Naples on theology and the Mediterranean this year, the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew alarmed that Lord's command to welcome the stranger is in danger, referring to the efforts of some governments to prevent desperate people from reaching the refuge. The problem of immigration, like other problems of today, must strengthen further the relations between the Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Protestant churches, and deepen the rapprochement between the Eastern and the Western Christian traditions at a time when the problem facing humanity all these problems require urgently a common Christian witness and an effort to make it relevant and meaningful to the existential needs and concerns of our time. Christians today must look seriously at the theological question and questions arising from the global turmoil of our time, and the tensions ignited over welcoming the weakest, those exposed to social and economic tensions. So it is my strong belief that theological criteria are first and foremost required. Without theological awareness and sensitivity, the response to this crisis can be a hazardous endeavor. At this historic time, and with the way the refugee crisis is developing, those people who can exercise influence have to work in the spirit of the gospel. So in this presentation, I examine some ambiguities in the notion of the refugee and what they reveal. The mass creation of refugees is a systemic feature of the common globalized world. I perceive the figure of the refugee as a human excess, which by its very character as an excess, manifests the imperfection of the world, of those who do not constitute such an excess. In this presentation, I am based on the theological dimension of the neighbor, trying to relate it to the contemporary humanitarian crisis in the context of a reflection about the character of globalization. In addressing this topic, I would follow something along the lines of the epistle to Diognetus, how Christians treat every land and none as their fatherland. Paul's idea in Philippians of an eschatological citizenship still to come. I would also bring, but not this time, bring in Plato's idea from the Republic that the earthly cities in which we dwell are an image and distorted that of the inner man, and man is to dwell within the city he himself is. Finally, I will address this challenge through the notion of the diaspora, which for a long time has been one of the most complex problems of all of Orthodoxy. The diaspora reminds us of our journey and the baptismal status in of the church in this world and era. We are in the world, but not of this world. So, some biblical ideas and views on the love for strangers. Some believe that the biblical story is a migration story. Okay? Both the Old and New Testament tell compelling stories of refugees forced to flee because of oppression. Although we won't find the term refugee in the Bible, there is an abundance of passages referring to immigrants and refugees, calling them strangers, sojourners, or foreigners. So hospitality represents a concrete example of love for these strangers and the way all people of God should live their lives. It is an inclusive hospitality that always makes room for the stranger. Exodus tells the story of the chosen people, Israel, who were victims of bitter slavery in Egypt. The Israelites' experience of living as homeless aliens was so painful and frightening that God ordered his people for all time to have special care for the alien in Leviticus. And the New Testament was also already mentioned, begins with Matthew's story of Joseph and Mary's escape to Egypt. So our Savior himself lived as a refugee because his own land was not safe. And interestingly, in the Gospel according to Luke, Jesus is presented as a foreigner and a stranger in this world, though this not exclude his hypostatic connection with the world. Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. The Bible challenges us to love those who are different from ourselves, rather than to remain in our comfort zone by surrounding ourselves with like-minded, similar people. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? And so on, Matthew 6:47. Okay. One of the fundamental consequences of baptism is that the new man would have not his father on earth, but in heaven, and that this brethren would be the members of the church. Similarly, the new man would have no citizenship on earth, but in heaven, since his city would be the future kingdom. Thus, he would be a stranger, or she would be a stranger in this life. This was the existential meaning of baptism as death of the old person and birth of the new eschatological person. So Christ is the great stranger inside history, the Good Samaritan who comes to undermine the order of the existing monolithic communities. By taking sinners into the community of the eschatological meal with himself, Jesus introduced another ethos and logic. He came as a stranger and surprised his own people. Previously, he had come to his own people, and they did not receive him. Images of Christ are crucified everywhere today. In the boats carrying migrants and refugees, in the victims of human trafficking, in the immigrants that are stabbed as scapegoats in the streets of European capitals, in persons imprisoned in concentration camps. In the 4th century, the Saint Gregory the theologian, on whom I wrote my thesis, reminded his contemporary Christians, "You will not pose any danger to yourself by doing this. Come to his or her help, offer him or her nourishment, offer her a scrap of clothing, provide medicine, bind up his wounds, ask something about her condition, offer sage advice about endurance, giving encouragement, be a support." An advice easily applied or applicable for our times. It is my personal experience that if I do not see Christ in the person of the stranger, the sick, the suffering, and the imprisoned, then I do not know him at all. The stranger is Jesus in disguise. Let me quote from an Athonite elder who said this, that Jesus came to his own people did not receive him. He comes as a stranger. He seems strange to his own people, and he makes strangers his guests, because he loves strangers, because he loves even those who deny him. This is the reason why he frees his own people too. By loving strangers and considering them family, he loves you. He broadens your horizon of life. If strangers are not your own family, you lose both your own family and yourself. His own people, his friends, his family, his mother, and his brothers are defined in a different way. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother, and so on and so on. End quote. Just as God sends rain upon the just and the unjust, Matthew 5:45, so the saints of the church do not recognize just and unjust. They regard everyone as just and pure. And I'm telling you this because this ascetic perspective from the tradition is very helpful today. We had the saints who loved the animals and cared about the whole creation, prayed even for lizards and the demons. So they do not regard some people as close to them and good, and others as strangers. They rather regard the strangers, the lost and the tormented, as close to them, because they regard their own self as lost and unworthy. So these were some theological and biblical notes about the immigration and refugee problem. Now let me tell you something about the church perspective on the refugee crisis and the response from the diaspora, because you asked me that. I think that theology in recent years does not seem to have given appropriate weight to the immigrant status of the church. There has been a gradual loss of the sense that not only in Christian life, but also in the divine Eucharist, there is a movement towards the end. The journey of the world, in St. Maximus' phrase, towards the kingdom, and the coming kingdom of the kingdom to the world. It is mostly in the so-called diaspora that this dimension was rediscovered. During the 1970s and 80s, Orthodox theologians in America already had begun to ponder what sort of post-immigrant identity the Orthodox Church might forge, while they also laid the groundwork for a social ethics and missiology in a democratic, religiously plural, and increasingly secular land. Let me just remind you, Thomas will, I think, concur, that the diaspora is not only a negative term, indicating that there is dispersion and loss, losing the people or whatever it is about. It's also a positive term, because when you sow, spiron, diaspora, then you grow and you cultivate. So I think that the diaspora has both notions. And for most, the diaspora has for a long time been one of the most complex problems for all of orthodoxy. The diaspora, to be clear from the start, just as with the Jews in Scripture, by itself is not evil. It was inevitable and a challenge of God's Israel, the old and the new, that is, the church. If nothing else, the diaspora of all of us as the community of God's people in history reminds us of our journey in this world and era. As I said, we are in the world, but not of this world. We are in God's home, this earth, but salvation is still in process. The kingdom of God is present, but we are still en route to the kingdom, toward the heavenly fatherland. For here we do not have an enduring city, ugarechomen ode menusan polin, but we are looking for the city that is to come, alatin melusan epizitumen, Hebrew 13:14. But thanking to this diaspora phenomenon, new trends in the Orthodox theology made their appearance through the Russians who immigrated to Europe after the Soviet Revolution, then moved to America, and created a so-called neo-patristic trend in our theology, which shed the light on many problems and contemporary issues. The task of contemporary theology is to establish the way of placing the theology of neighbor in a common conceptual context. Our theology is not protological, but eschatological, because our nostalgia for the land of the living is a future nostalgia, an eschatological nostalgia directed forward. I was impressed when I heard that some of the refugees and immigrants did not think of their former land, but tried to establish connection with the new reality and new land. So it is not like the ancient Hellenic or Indian nostalgia or any other nostalgia which is entirely directed backward. Nostalgia means sorrow, pain for one's place of birth, for one's fatherland, for one's origin. But our citizenship is in heaven, and our life is in heaven, as says the Holy Apostle Paul. This is why we are nostalgic toward the future, toward eschatology, toward the fullness that actually attracts us to itself. And I think this notion is helpful for all those who find themselves in a foreign land. There is a future land, future kingdom, which is what gives meaning to our historic destiny and our hardships. In the history of the Serbian diaspora here, which lasts for about 2 centuries, the first Serbian Orthodox came to this land in 1815, and then we had the creation of many parishes. But what was the most, I would say, Christian thing that they could offer to their all new-coming friends was the parish life. The parishes were those shelters for newcomers. And in the entire history of Serbian Americans, Serbian diaspora in North America, from the first Serbian immigrants to the most recent immigrants waves, the founding of a parish was a giant step towards organizing their religious and social life. So sharing the Eucharistic bread revealed the energetic renewal of social compassion's joy as it spreads from face to face like candlelight spreading from taper to taper in Pascal's pre-dawn. So the proper basis for humanitarianism in a Serbian experience is the same as the basis for our understanding of God. Relationship, persons in communion, and so on. It is noteworthy that from the beginning of Serbian Orthodox, people accepted all the challenges of the Christian experience in America. Immigration, struggles over cultural and linguistic identity, schisms, missionary outreach, theological renewal, ecumenical concerns, and philanthropic endeavors. So steeped in their Christian faith, the Serbian church communities throughout America carried forward the faith and customs from the Old World, but the history of their parishes is also part of the rich history of America. So when the Serbian Orthodox Church was established in the U.S., one of its primary goals was to make the first Serbian immigrants' lives better. Almost organically, the church became one of the few Serbian institutions that started helping immigrants early on to navigate the U.S. society, but also to preserve their ethnic and cultural identity. Since the establishment of the first Serbian church in Jackson, California, end of the 19th century, much has changed, but the church has continued to play multiple roles and to have special importance in the hearts and minds of the immigrants. In addition to satisfying their liturgical life and religious needs and spiritual needs, many social, linguistic, and cultural needs have also been addressed, including the preservation of individual, group, national heritage. Immigration continues to be one of the most politically polarizing issues in America, as we have heard. But Christian obligation to welcome the stranger, said Patriarch Bartholomew, does not remove the moral obligation to address the root causes of mass migrations of people, which cause further poverty in the world's south and the phenomenon of intolerance in those who should be practicing welcome as a dictate of their acceptance of the gospel. While individuals have the right to move in search of a safe and humane life, no country is bound to accept all those who wish to resettle there. By this principle, the Church recognizes that most immigration is ultimately not something to celebrate. Ordinary people do not leave the security of their own land and culture just to seek adventure in a new place or merely to enhance their standing of living. Instead, they migrate because they are desperate and the opportunity for a safe and secure life does not exist in their own life. And we know that, and we know how America used to serve as an example for the world. But from the point of view of Christianity, I believe, no one is an immigrant insofar as we are all, in more than one sense, immigrants. And if Christianity has anything to say on this discussion, is a critique on the idolatry of such notions as homeland and fatherland. Of course, one has to be careful in saying this, as there are many people who won't like to hear this. But this is, I think, the basic Christian perspective, and if we have this perspective, then everything can be sanctified, even the earthly homeland and fatherland. Let me conclude with a few reference to what Patriarch Bartholomew said, who is the spiritual leader of Orthodox Christians. He's urging Europe to stop trying to divide what he calls economic migrants from asylum seekers. And the symbolic visit is when he visited the Naples with the Pope, was to reiterate the Christian moral duty to show hospitality to strangers. And he says, "This question puts me in mind of St. Paul's letter to the Hebrews, in which he reminds us not to forget hospitality, because those who offer it have sometimes hosted angels without knowing it." So the transformative ontology of Christian humanitarianism also has ecological implications, because the chasm, the gap between the rich and the poor, as in the gospel parable, the rich man and Lazarus, is also of cosmic significance. Beyond the ideological commitment to global environmental wholeness, the Orthodox are mindful of the Eucharistic and ascetical approach to the natural environment and to the problem of immigration. Our compassion cannot fail to be expanded to include all of God's innocent creation, people, etc. So, in conclusion, I think that this perspective, which reminds us of how the stranger is not simply our relative or somebody who belongs to our ethnic community, but the total stranger, is something that we should reiterate in today's discussion about immigrants. And by saying that, I hope that I have offered at least something into this discussion, and I'm ready for your questions further on. Thank you very much. And the book that I brought here is for you. You can also take a look at it, and also the image that I mentioned at the very beginning is also available, so you can look at it and see what the artist wanted to share with you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Isaac, please join us. Vana, would you like to join us? Yes, please, why not? Sure. So, do you have any questions? Please come to the mics and ask your questions. Don't hesitate. While we are deciding, I have a question to Bishop Maxim, my first question, if I may. Well, Your Eminence, you have a wonderful personal story, albeit from a family which was affected by the war, by the troubles, turmoil in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Your father, as a priest, was a hostage, right? And for a short while. What kind of experience can you share with us from your youth, childhood, your experience of the war and of refugees as a result of that war?
Thank you. We, in the former Yugoslavia, we had two recent wars. One was related to the breakup of former Yugoslavia in 1992, and the second one was the Kosovo crisis in 1999. So we had this sad chance of seeing many refugees, thousands and thousands, on many, many sides. Of course, nobody was prepared for the war. As you mentioned, when my father was, as a priest, arrested to be exchanged, then my family was already in on the other side, safe, so to say. And from 1992, our immigration started. We were migration, so to say, migrating from one place to another. I was still young. I was a student, and as a future priest, was free from taking part in battles and so on in armed conflict, but I stayed with my people and was witness of many atrocities on all sides. So probably all the people that I met were refugees in a sense. Nobody was, except for those who stayed on their territory. But again, in the same city, you had so many refugees. And that's one part of my life which has negative, I would say, dimension, living the fearsome aspects of war. And then the more positive is the one we experienced here in the States, where as a bishop, I arrived here in 2006. There were already refugees and immigrants coming into the States, so there was no another wave of immigration, but the one that was before I came, people were already here. And in this book we have many stories about the communities, how they built their own parishes. And I would say America, the United States of America and the Washington, who was involved on the other side against the Serbian people, my own people, welcomed all of these people. So we had this, so to say, reconciliation through this act of mercy. And we are grateful for that, of course, and continue to be thankful. So this would be something personal, and there are many, many details can take place right now. But thank you for asking me that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing it. Please, you may ask a question if you want.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. So I have an inquiry, please, Bishop, since you're a wonderful quoter of Scripture. So as you know, the New Testament is linked to the Old Testament theologically in terms of the Hebrew Bibles called the Tanakh. So in Colossians 1:12, it says, giving thanks to our risen Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, Yeshua Messiah Almighty, and God the Father, which hath made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light. So with your gift to bear, theologically speaking, ecumenically, what is a saint in light? Saint in light. Colossians 1:12, the inheritance of the saints in light.
Saints and light.
Colossians 1:12,
Okay.
giving thanks which hath made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light.
In light.
In light.
Okay.
In light.
Well, Kadosh. Okay. I have written a book about holiness in the Old Testament and New Testament, but this question is truly amazing. If I had the quote before me, I would be more at comfort to analyze it. But I think the whole Bible is in the movement toward the future. So everything that happens in the Old Testament points to the next event, which will confirm the old one, the previous one. And this logic of the Bible, I think, is very Christian, because everything we do has to be confirmed in the next generation. That's why there are so many promises in the Old Testament. God promises to Abraham that his posterity will achieve what he promised to him. This inheritance is also a future dimension of the future, which through the experience of the Israel becomes foretasted, anticipated in this age. The saints in light, obviously, could be only those who made by the only Holy One, so that they will. So who are the saints? That is another dimension. I think if we go through the St. Paul, he would include all those who are partakers of God's covenant. The light, the notion of logical one, the absence of darkness, and the final banquet with God the Father through all the saints, all the people, and the altar, Israel. But since you asked, I assume that you have a better explanation, and I believe that there is only one. Thank you.
Any other question from the floor? Yes, please come. Could you please come? It's for video recording. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. I too am Catholic, and yet I've never had someone like Isaac come to our church and maybe speak about what it is that you're talking about here. I would think that you'd be welcome at most of the Catholic churches, at least in the South Bay area. And I think that would have been a very good source for funding for people like Vana. And I was just curious if you've ever been invited or if that's something you'd like to do.
Thank you. Great question. Yes, I've been invited, and I'm happy to attend any parish and any pretty much event.
Again, I do speak at a lot of high schools and colleges, and believe it or not, high schools are one of those areas that I really love going and speaking to the children about immigration and what this means, because it's a similar version to what you kind of heard here today, except I get into the intricacies of really the three true ways that people can actually immigrate into this country legally, right? Which are blood, sweat, and tears. Blood through a blood relative, anyone who actually has status in this country, and then thus you can petition for that person, but depending on the proximity of that family member, that time can be anywhere between 2 to 10, 20 years. Sweat is really truly through a type of visa, whether it's a work visa or a school visa, but in essence, the context there is that you're actually working for the visa, yet it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you actually have legal status here. That's not saying that you're not permitted to be here, but it's actual true legal status in terms of being allowed to stay in this country. And tiers, the third way, is similar to Vanna's situation, where it's because of a natural disaster, some kind of war, or fleeing persecution in one's country of origin. And again, as our speakers here have talked about today, it's many times it's not the person with the most resources or necessarily even the poorest people that want to or try to flee. It's the ones who feel they are the most in imminent danger. And just to put some context to that as well, the issue that we're having at the border is primarily right now around people from Central America. It's not around people from Mexico, and it's all people who legally have the right to come and declare asylum status at our border, yet the new policies that are in place right now prevent people from doing that, and it's now forcing people to remain on the Mexico side while their cases are being heard. I can tell you, I was 2 weeks ago, I was in Ciudad Juarez with, again, the Knights of Columbus, who have committed to donating $250,000 to assist refugees on the Mexico side of the border. They purposely did not want to get involved in the politics of what's happening right now here in this country, and they've committed to helping people on the Mexico side as a way of showing that as an organization that's dedicated to charity and helping people in need, this is the way that they could answer that call. And it was amazing to see Brother Knights, by the way, I'm a Knight, Brother Knights from El Paso and Juarez coming together to work on this issue. And they donated a semi-truck full of clothing, diapers, water, food, medicine. It was truly impressive, and I mean, again, an honor to be a part of something like that. And that all happens at the parish level. And that all happens when we formulate these dialogues and we can get in there and people all of a sudden realize, hey, I can do something and I can make a difference and I can feel good doing it.
Well, I was curious about that because I know that our parish is quite progressive and very generous, and then I'm also a great networker with other people that have, positions of influence in some of the other parishes in the South Bay, St. Lawrence Martyrs, St. James. So if you would like to come, I'd like to get your business card and arrange for something like that.
I'm there anytime. Let me know, and I'll get your information afterwards and consider it done.
Well, we are very happy to connect people. Yeah, please follow.
That's part of the Huffington
Right.
Economic Institute. Isaac, if we could just for a moment revisit the whole idea of, yes, but the law's been broken, that you have referred to, the attitude of people. Those of us in parishes, and no matter if you're at St. Lawrence or any of the other more progressive parishes in the South Bay, there will be people that have that attitude. Believe me, there will be people that have that attitude. So, and we all don't have the advantage of bringing Blanca to put a face on these situations. So, could you give us some hints as to how to handle that question?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, really, the basic essence of this is, by the way, when I came to this country as a 2-year-old, my mother wanted nothing to do with the old country, right? So I was actually baptized and confirmed in Mexico, came here and grew up evangelical, right? My mom, again, wanted nothing to do, didn't want to go to Catholic church, so I grew up evangelical. It wasn't until I got married that I then came back to Catholicism. And my kids asked me one day, how come I don't say communion? So I went and took my classes and, went through the whole process. Now there's this weird math that when you're a convert, you're more Catholic than your spouse is. I don't know what that math is like, but I don't know how that math works, but apparently it's true. And again, God works in his own way. And to answer your question, Father, for me, the simple fact of this has all been everything I do has to be grounded in my faith first. Right? We're in the process right now of going out to parishes and instilling faithful citizenship workshops where we're talking about the two most divisive topics in this country right now, right, which are abortion and immigration, right? And funny enough, sometimes the people who are the most against this issue of abortion are also the ones that are most against immigrants. I've been in parishes where I've been shouted down by these people when one moment we're talking about pro-life issues, and then when I start talking about immigration, they're like, well, those people broke the law and you can't da-da-da-da-da. And what I've learned is that to be a person of faith means that you respect and understand all life, all issues of life. Life doesn't just end when you magically are conceived, right? That's not the only place where we have to put our focus and our energy, and now that doesn't mean that we can't focus on the persecutions of Christians in the Middle East. That's a life issue. Loneliness. Our elderly are suffering from loneliness once they wind up in these situations where they don't have their kids and no one to look after them. That's a life issue. And as somebody of faith, I can't sit here and genuinely only worry about this one issue. And we were just asking about saints. That I know of, and again, remember, I'm the convert here, that I know of, there is no single issue saints that exist. Yes, you have a patron saint of X, Y, or Z, but there's no single issue saints. When you go out there and you live your faith, you do it to its full capacity. And again, for me and for the church, this issue of immigration, first and foremost, is about human dignity. So whenever somebody comes and starts talking to me about the legality of it all, it's like, wait, okay, if you want to go to the legal and the justice part of it all, fine, we will. Let's put faith aside for a second. But as a citizen of this country, then, it's your responsibility to hold our legislators accountable. Don't blame the person who's in this situation and is only trying to do the best for them and their families. We would never look at I was at a parish by the beach. Not to knock the beach in the west side. I love the west side. Beautiful parish, great breeze that comes in every day in the afternoon. They don't even have an air conditioning at this parish. But I'm there, and after I give my talk on immigration, the deacon who was hosting us says, well, thank you, Isaac, but we'll keep your information on hand, and if we hear of something, we'll let you know, but we really don't have an immigrant problem here in our parish. And just as I was getting ready to sit down, I stand back up and I'm like, Deacon, forgive me, and with all due respect, please understand that it's not that you don't have an immigrant problem here at your parish. It's that as a parish, you're not thinking about what you can be doing for immigrants. Think about that. Would you ever look at a homeless person and say, well, it's their fault, they're homeless, I'm not going to help them? Of course not. That's not who we are. You look at the person that's in need and you do everything you possibly can to help. Why should immigrants or refugees be any different?
I really want to say how, to be here all day has just been a great experience. And the question that I have for all three of you is, Bishop, you were talking about this concept of the future. And in terms of all three of your experience, however you want to take this question, either personally or theologically, one of the things that I'm most struck by about my daughter's generation, she's about 24, and many of my students, is that because of, as one of you mentioned, it's a debated political point, but it seems to be an established scientific point that there is terrible climate change going on. And one of the things that I've noticed in doing the kind of work with refugees that I do is that I'm always struck by the amazing amount of infrastructure that we have in the United States in relationship to, say, the infrastructure in a country like Somalia, where there's absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, to intervene between them and the facts of starvation. And so what I'm just curious to each of you, that in my daughter's generation, their whole concept of the future as something that actually will happen seems to me seriously endangered. And it's a deep anxiety that I notice in her as to whether or not the future will actually be there. And so I just wondered if each of you, from your experience, could just maybe talk about what the future meant to you and what it means to you now.
Do it quickly. I think the future was that what helped me in these difficult years, because you had the present, which was terrible. The past is behind us. You don't possess it. You only have memories. And the future was not the solution, because it was unknown, unpredictable. But at the same time, since we were raised as Christians with faith, and quoting from St. Paul, who said that the faith is the hypostasis ton elpizomenon. It's the foundation of the things we hope for. At the same time, this future was somehow present in our lives in the acts of mercy. Wherever people showed compassion, that was the sign of the future of God present in our midst. So, to say briefly, it was the future that saved us in those days, so to say. Of course, we call it faith or hope or expectation of the better tomorrow, but linked to our faith and the substance of our faith was exactly the prerequisite and condition for survival, so to say.
I think this question is very appropriate for Vanna, considering she is the future here and the youngest person in the room.
Future for me is today to be a good person, good Christian, and help the people in need hand to hand, so that way we can have better future all together. And today's generation is mostly like, I feel like they're giving more attention to the material thing and forgetting about church, religion, and they're forgetting about God in their everyday life. And from my experience, what kept me like push forward was my faith in God, and that He's with me, and like I would do my best, I'll be a good person, like work hard, have the faith, and that way I was able to go also through my struggles in the last like 7 years. And I feel like the future will be good if it continues that way. And that's it.
Thank you.
I also have, if I may, a question to Vanna, if I may, because well, this conversation is recorded and will be watched by some students at our university, and some of those students face the same kind of problems that you faced. What would be your advice from your experience, how to deal with the situations like yours? Please share your thoughts about this.
Yes. Even though I had to face the struggle, I finished pharmacy school in Syria, and it was after 5 years when I was supposed to get my bachelor's degree and get my license exam. The school got shut down, and I had to leave the country in a month because it was unbearable to live in dangerous situations. So it was my life's nightmare when suddenly, like after 5 years of hard work, I wasn't able to get my pharmacy degree. And I came here, new life, unprepared, and you're struggling for your living. So one of the main reasons I didn't give up. Again, it was my faith that, and also I believe in this, that wherever there's a will, there's a way. So I wasn't afraid to knock the doors. Like, as I mentioned, I knocked the door of the Catholic Church, like asking help. And yes, there might be people like Mr. Isaac Cuevas who was like was willing to help. And sometimes you will get disappointed. But at the end of the day, it's very important to not give up and to do your best, do your research, and look for the resources available out there, and have the faith that everything will be okay.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, please. Say it.
My question is to Anna. In fact, I have a picture with me of people fleeing Edessa after the genocide and taking refuge in Aleppo in 1926. And I was wondering whether you have family members who experienced the genocide and fled to Aleppo, and whether you have heard the story, and when you connect their story to your story today, what similarity and differences you see. Thank you.
So I'm Armenian ethnicity, and my grandfather actually was born during the genocide on the way from Turkey to Syria. And we grew up, like, even though we grew up in Arabic country, like, and we as an Armenian and Christians, we were able to have our community, churches, schools. And we grew up with the story, and hearing how they flee, not even flee, they walked back then. They walked to Syria with like no money, no food, and how they were able with their determination to build a like new city of them. So we were always like, when we grew up, we were amazed with their story, how like they were able to go through that difficulty and survive. So, and I didn't know one day, like the same, almost like the same story will be repeating again. But this time was like not walking, it was fleeing the country. And again, like if my ancestors didn't give up and they were able to survive, and that gave me like the motivation also, like, yes, now life is more easier from back then, and like there's ways we can also survive too and rebuild and establish ourselves.
If I can underscore Vanna's point, and again, this goes back to Father Alexi's question earlier about how to engage with people on this topic when they want to center on the legality of what's happening with immigration. Many times it's not until you hear a personal story and you understand the context of what somebody has gone through that helps to, again, change that heart, right? I used to say, I just recently read a book called Just Mercy by Brian Stevens that talks all about how the African American community in this country was lynched and killed and murdered first, in the streets of the South and then in courthouses. And when I would talk about immigration, I would always say, unless you're Native American or African American, you have an immigrant story that you may not know about, right? Well, I don't include the African American community in that anymore, because I realized through this book that even the African American community fled the South, and this is why we have big communities of African Americans in Chicago, in Cleveland, in Los Angeles, in Detroit, in New York, because there was persecution that was happening in the South to such an incredible degree that they fled. And we think of migration as having to cross a border. They fled. That's migration, looking for a better life and looking for somewhere to raise your family and feel safe. And we even have that history within our own country. So it's not until you put it into that context that sometimes it helps. And that's one of the ways that I try to use to break through by sharing stories like what you've heard here today.